Hey everyone, this is Devin Francis, aka Leonard Meltzner, and we
And
are
this is Victoria.
back! It has been an extremely long absence, at least for us. I don't know how long it'll be for you guys, between the pilot, part 1 and 2 review, and this episode, but for us, it's been a month since we've recorded because things have been absolutely crazy, but I'm going to have a lot more time now that classes have ended. Just a couple finals to tie things up, and I'm all free for winter break, so we can finally catch up on the past month and a half of episodes. I'm very sorry I'm falling behind, except for you guys. It's a break between episode 14 and 15, not 16 and 17. So, today, now that season 57 is over, we are going to be moving on some other things. As while season 57 was out, what we are going to continue doing is every second week there's going to be a review of 2 episodes, and in the in-between ones we're going to be having other varied, assorted, gallimaufry, hodgepodge, sundry type episodes. And that is what this is. As we did the review of the pilot parts 1 and 2 last week, this week we're going to be having another discussion episode, just general talking about stuff like we did. Our first video is Odyssey, a kid show. And this week, what will we be talking about, Victoria?
We will be talking about why AIO has lasted
Das
so
is
long.
correct. So, I don't think we have anything else to announce. So, we will get right into our discussion. So, the first point, which came to mind when I started writing down notes about this topic, was the fact that Odyssey does not focus on only one main character or one small set of characters. It doesn't even need to contain any of the main characters. And most TV shows, and normally when we're talking about things like this, we'll be referring to TV shows because really, you can't really talk about a lot of popular radio dramas to compare Odyssey to. You have to compare it to TV shows because they're essentially the same thing, just, with your eyes closed. So, yeah, as far as TV shows go, usually you're going to have your main characters, and episodes will never deviate from at least, half of that main group. For example, when I was thinking about the first one came to my mind as an example was The Big Bang Theory, where we have Leonard, and we have Sheldon, and we have Raj, and we have Howard as our mainest 4 characters. And there's rarely an episode which doesn't have all 4 of them, and I don't think that there's a single episode in the entire, 6 seasons?
6
Yeah, there's not a
seasons,
single episode, I don't believe, that contains none of them and only focuses on the side characters. And while that's good for having characters that are interesting and you get a lot of chance to do lots of characterization on a small group of characters, the problem therein is the fact that you're very reliant on those characters. You don't branch out into a lot of other things, and that really limits what you can do, especially when problems arise out of canon, like an actor can't do things anymore. If you use specific characters in a small group as the foundation of your show, you're putting it on pretty weak foundation. Whereas Odyssey, it's certainly true that there's a small group of main characters that are in almost every episode, like Wit is in a lot of episodes, Connie is in a lot of episodes, Eugene is in a lot of episodes, but there's certainly...
And Bernard and Wooten is in some compared to them. Chris is in
Wooten
a lot of
is the
episodes.
12th most common character, so he's actually quite a bit down on the list. But, what was I saying now? Yes. The fact is, when you look at their numbers, the number of episodes that all 3 of them are in compared to the total number of episodes, they're really not in all that many. And there are, in fact, or is, I should say, one single episode which not only doesn't contain any major characters or even any minor characters, but it doesn't have a single character in it which ever appears in any other episode again. And that episode is A Change of Heart, way back in album 1, about Freddie Hart changing schools and then learning that you can't just try and change yourself to make people like you. That's not how life is supposed to work. And the episode, it's not bad, but it's really not like, this is the best episode ever.
I feel bad for him that he gets made fun of and lots of people don't like him, but I really don't like that episode. It's one of my
Yeah, the episode
favorite.
Isn't all that great. I mean, way back in the first album, there's not a whole lot of home run hits. I mean, the show was trying to find its stride back then. Well, Imagine Guy was the most popular episode of 1987. Granted, the show started November 21st, so there really weren't all that many episodes in 1987, but I digress. The point is, not only does A Change of Heart show that Odyssey is capable of making episodes that don't include any characters that ever even appear ever again, but it was actually made expressly for that purpose, which I think is really cool. Because I would totally understand, we could use a great example out of an episode that just happens to not have any of the main characters in it. The only real connection to the show is the fact that it takes place in Odyssey and concerns Odyssey Academy. But the episode was specifically written to show that Adventures in Odyssey is not dependent on John Avery Whittaker, and it's not dependent on Connie Kendall or even Wit's End.
It has Chris in A Change of Heart.
Chris is not a character, though.
I consider her a character.
But she's not, otherwise she would be like breaking the fourth wall in every single episode. The fourth wall breaks in Odyssey are when she talks to the characters, because she isn't one of the characters. Anyways, I think that is a really strong point. And as I was saying, what that has to do with the show lasting so long is, yes, when you build your foundation on characters like that, if something happens to the characters, then you're losing a huge part of your show. Whereas, because Odyssey, to turn into chemistry terms, the charge of the show has been decentralized across all the characters, which makes it a lot more stable.
Thank you for using Eugene's terms. Now will you please translate it for the rest of us?
What I'm saying is that if Eugene left the show permanently or for a long time, the show would be able to get on without him. If Whit left the show for a long time or permanently, the show would be able to get on without him. And I'm not just spurting nonsense.
And both of those things
because
have
both
happened.
of those things have happened. And all the time people are like, what would happen if Whit died? The show would just totally end. There's no way it could go on without him. When in fact, it has happened before. Whit left for quite a while before coming back. And interestingly, for both Eugene and for Whit, upon their return to Odyssey, they both had specific episodes in which the fact was dealt with and the idea expressed that neither of them are truly necessary to the show. While they may be necessary for certain people at some points in their lives, the fact that we are Christians and that God helps us move forward in our lives and through our situations means that just because we're dependent on someone now doesn't mean we're always going to be dependent on them. Life is dynamic, and people change, and they grow, and they lose the dependency that they have on some other people. So for Whit, that was the decision, and everyone realized that they like having Whit around, and there was a time when they needed him, but he isn't 100% necessarily anymore. The same thing with Eugene in Back to Abnormal, where he had to deal with the fact that he didn't fit into the normal roles that he used to have, kind of looking at normality in the same way that we see it in Pet Peeves. Normality changes. It's a dynamic thing that evolves with time and the way our circumstances change, and so you have to be willing to be dynamic along with that, meaning that the characters can leave and life will go on, and that's such an important thing. If Sheldon Cooper suddenly left The Big Bang Theory, the show probably would not last very long anymore at all, if at all. Do you agree?
I don't think the show would keep on going if he left.
Exactly.
But, yeah.
I think he would be the kicker for the show to end right then and there, and if one of the other main four left, it would either end right there or end at the end of that season or very shortly thereafter.
Well, especially Sheldon, because he's the fan favorite.
Yeah.
So, I think that I don't really understand it when people say, like, Odyssey can't go on just if something bad happens. Like, I remember even I said that one time, about a month or so ago. I asked Devin what would happen if the voice actor for Eugene died, because
Will
he
Ryan
is,
is pretty old now. He's like
yeah.
70, 80 something. A lot older than Andre
And
Stoika, actually, which is really weird.
so I
Not as old
asked
as Wit,
Devin
though.
if they would maybe replace him, if he thought they would or not. And he said probably not, because it would probably turn into another Bart Rathbone incident,
In album
which
50, and
I completely agree with.
yeah.
But anyway, the point is, we don't need him, we don't need Wit.
Not that we don't want him. I mean, we love
Yeah,
Eugene, but
we definitely want them.
when it
And
comes down to the brass tacks.
especially Wooten, I don't understand that one when people say Wooten is so crucial. I'm like, he wasn't even there for he hasn't even been there half the time.
Yeah,
So,
we've survived the first 36 albums without him. I think Odyssey could carry on. Which isn't to
anyway.
say, of course, that we don't, love having Jess and Will and Andre
Well,
around.
yeah, don't take this in the wrong way.
But, the show is physically capable of surviving. It's like I could survive if my right arm got cut off, but I would prefer to keep both of them, in point of fact. So, to move on to the next point, this show has amazing characterization. From the beginning, Adventures in Odyssey has always made sure to focus on developing really deep and complex characters. Some of the characters, I should say, if we're talking about from the beginning, because, rumor has it was the first time we ever had a single kid character that actually reappear. Or sorry, I should say, rumor has is the first time that Jack and Lucy appeared. So, other than Monty, who had to reappear because he was Whit's grandson, rumor has is the first time we saw kids that would ever reappear again. Every single kid before that, which was like, that was the 32nd episode or something like that. I don't know. Everyone before that, those kids just were one-off characters every
They kind
single
of
time.
just dematerialized one day.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously they weren't very deep and complex, but for the reoccurring characters like Tom and Whit and Connie, from the beginning, the show was focusing on developing them as being deep and complex. And in family portraits, Whit-wise, we were already seeing the complexity of Whit's character, and that's so early on. That was before Adventures in Odyssey. I mean, Member of the Family was a family portraits episode. So that's before the show even began, and they were already looking at, how does Whit's character and his advice giving apply to himself and stuff, and looking at the flaws in his character. And as soon as the day that they came up with his name, of course there's all that story about that, looking through the phone book for names and all that. The day they came up with his name, I can't remember if it was, I think it was Phil, went into his office and wrote out Whit's entire life story. And so that entire backstory was written then, and we still haven't heard everything that was came up with on that day. We just have little bits and pieces. Some of them seem pretty disjointed at times. They were sewed together a lot by, whatchamacall, Great Expectations. I would say Charles Dickens' book, Great Expectations. And if you go back 2 episodes to Whit's Lore video, you can hear just how complex all that is already. And I'm sure there's still other stuff that we haven't heard yet from that day 26 years ago, over 26 years ago, when all that stuff was invented. So these characters are very complex, and we could spend videos just talking about, the different aspects of Whit's character and how they interact with people, or Eugene, or Connie, or Bernard, or Wooten, because they are more than just stereotypes and flat things. And a lot of times, if you just listen to a couple of episodes, they may seem like stereotypes, but really, like, the characters have so much more to them than that, and a lot of times it is really easy to miss things, but they are definitely there.
One interesting thing.
And if you want elaboration, I could go off about, how Eugene's abandonment issues have affected his decisions in life, or Connie's stubbornness or Wit's inability to look at his own life problems objectively or things like that. Yes, Victoria?
One interesting thing about the way Focus did characterization in AIO from the very beginning is right off the start you see like most of Wit's good things he has in his character. Like how he's grandfatherly, he's good at giving advice, and then a couple episodes later you see some of his flaws. And an interesting thing, if you think about it, is it's more like the way Connie was introduced. It's more you see her flaws right away. And then as the show goes on, you see less of those flaws. Like, still she's stubborn and she's super curious, but you see...
And outspoken.
And really
became
really
the
pretty
argumentative Christian
and,
we love
you
and
like
love
her.
today.
And so, but that probably has to mainly do with the fact that when Connie was first introduced, she was kind of made to be someone who would contradict Wit. So...
That is an interesting thought.
Do you agree?
I like that. I do agree. Okay. Another thing which is sort of tied to this in terms of character complexity is the fact that they are tied to more than just one character arc in terms of the plot devices that are concerning with them. And the example I thought of with this is the TV show Numbers. And if you haven't seen Numbers before, then, or if you're watching Numbers, you haven't finished it, rather, or you want to watch it in the future, just cover your ears for the next 60 seconds. So one of the two main characters in the TV show Numbers, it's a TV show about two brothers, and one of them is a squad leader for the CIA, and the other is a mathematical genius, and mathematical brother Charlie helps his brother solve all these big crime cases using mathematical analysis. And one of the biggest storylines that ran throughout the show was Charlie's relationship with one of his other teaching people at the university. And it went on through the seasons, and at the end, I can't remember, I think it was 4 seasons maybe it was more than that. The very last episode, they get married, and that's how the show ends. I was really quite sad because I really liked that show, and I thought about it, and I was like, oh, it would have been so great if they made more, but thinking on it, I don't really see how they could, because the show was tied so fundamentally, at least on Charlie's behalf. They have those two main characters, the two brothers, and they both had their own plot lines going on, and some of them differed at points with different things in time, but for him, that was the main thing that was always going on throughout the show. That was his big, strong, overarching character line. So once that ended there, you can't really have a whole lot more stuff because his character has been so tied to that single arc from the beginning. You can't, so if you try and introduce something else and just have that drain off, it's going to feel forced, and so the show had to end there, unfortunately. And the difference with Odyssey is that we have main characters who are complex enough that they're not just tied to one single character arc. As a matter of fact, it's interesting because you look at all the main action arcs, and they all seem to be tied to the same character in a complete reversal, and that character is Eugene. And we'll have a discussion about that another time, but if you look at, not really the Blackguard Saga so much, but like the end of the Blackguard Saga with Darkness Before Dawn and Novacom, the Leonard Meltzner saga, all the drama in Odyssey always seems to be centered around Eugene Meltzner, but that's another topic for another time. The point is, characters are allowed to not just be, oh, this is the character who's trying to do this, and they're going to be like this at the start of the show, and when they appear in episodes, things will happen concerning their goal, and at the end of the show, they'll complete their goal, and the show has to end there because, you know, we've been focusing on this entire thing, and once they've completed their goal, what else can we do with their character? We have Connie, who in the beginning, you know, we had her salvation arc working in, but there's also other storylines, relationship with her mother and her wanting to get back to California, and throughout time we have her relationship with Eugene, her relationship with Mitch, and with other guys. She's writing a book about Odyssey. Eugene as his search for his father, his relationship with Katrina, his quest for creating hand up, Manu Sarsam, please, whatever
Him
you want to
becoming
call
a
it.
Christian over
Which, it's
time.
please, or hand up is gone now. Anyways, yes, his salvation, which is also tied in with the Katrina storyline. It's all different things all tied together like a big tapestry, and it's not just like this character is only good for this and nothing else, because if you do that, then when you hit the end of their line, you've hit the end of the line and you're not going to be able to move forward from there. The next point, Victoria?
It has, it's not set in one single genre. So, over many episodes, you'll notice that at the beginning, something very, very early on that was introduced into the show was kids' radio. And so that's kind of a storytelling genre that they did for a while, telling Bible stories and doing other things, and Connie had her show on there, of course. And then albums later, you have like danger kind of drama and that kind of genre with Blackguard, and you also have mystery genres with like The Mystery of the Missing Train Car and Sounds Like a Mystery and all of the Emily episodes, but we won't talk about those. And and also we have BTV and lots of different sagas and genres, like finding things that are lost, like people looking for each other, looking for family members. Yeah, I know, I just said
It's
that.
not really a genre.
Romance genre with Eugene, Katrina, Connie, Mitch, even though that was more action than anything. And yeah. And so everyone finds like one certain genre that they connect to. Some people like individual genres, like just action, 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 and nothing else comes in, like comedy or drama. And other people, like myself, like it when there's some action and some comedy and some romance in there. And the nice thing about Odyssey is it's not, I'm going to use an example, Sherlock, which I love that show so much. It's so good. Stephen Moffat's
January
a jerk.
1st.
Yeah, we're excited.
January
Stephen
1st.
Moffat is a huge jerk. Anyway, so what Sherlock has going on for it is the reason it's so popular is even though it's Sherlock Holmes, it's not just mystery. It also has comedy thrown in there, has some romance kind of with him and Irene, John and his
And
multiple
him and John.
girlfriends, him and Molly, etc. And
well, it's still only one genre, just because the other element
Yeah.
of Sherlock is still just one genre.
But the reason people can connect to it so well is because they find different elements in it that are interesting.
Or just
and
because
it's
of
the same
Benedict
with Odyssey.
Cumberbatch and his cheekbones.
That too.
The point I wanted to make with this point about how the show isn't set into one single genre is the fact that most TV shows are going to do that, and Sherlock is an example. It is a mystery and action show, or, things are a sitcom, and so it's going to be about comedy all the time. You might throw in a little bit of action and throw in a little bit of romance and drama, but primarily it's focused on comedy. And Odyssey, in terms of you look across all the different episodes, it is all over the place in terms of the things it does. And just last week, I was watching a short little documentary where people were interviewing David Tennant, Matt Smith, Moffat, etc., talking about why Doctor Who has lasted for so long, because, of course, we just had the 50th anniversary of Doctor Who. Day the Doctor was amazing. Oh, so good. And they were talking about why Doctor Who has lasted for 50 years. That's a very long time, and I just happened to be writing about why Adventures in Odyssey had lasted so long, 26 years, at the very same time. And so I thought it was an interesting perspective hearing other people talk about, why has it lasted so long, because Doctor Who obviously is not Odyssey, but they do have a lot of similarities. Some of them are a little harder to see than others, but they are still there. So as I was listening to it, one thing that I thought about that really connected with this point, which I think I'd already written down, was the fact that Doctor Who can do just about anything. You can have an episode like, I mean, most episodes are really action-oriented or mystery, but it's not so much lots of genres, but the fact that they can really diversify into just about any idea. Now we can have an episode which is set in the past and it's going to be purely historical, educational kind of episode. And in the modern series, there's still going to be some extraterrestrial stuff thrown in there, but still you can learn a lot about history. And that's one of the reasons Doctor Who was created originally, was to teach kids about history, which is why the first Doctor had a lot of history episodes without any alien interference. It was just history and interviewing with historical figures. Conversely, you could go into the future, have an adventure with the Daleks, which is pure classic sci-fi with spaceships and laser guns and robots, which the Daleks are not technically.
And Mind Crush.
Yes. Or you could have some kind of weird horror thriller like Hide or Blink, where it's more like a ghost story kind of thing set in the modern day. Or you could do a fantasy thing, because the way they take science on Doctor Who is a wide enough of a stretch that you can do things that, while technically being in the realm of science on the show, is really more of a fantasy element, and we can get elements of fantasy stories that are taken in and just tweaked a little so that technically we can consider them science in the canon of the show, and get things like the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe in the Doctor, the Widow, and the Wardrobe. Even though most of the story was pretty different, it's still the same idea. And it's the same thing with Odyssey. We don't just have to focus on slice-of-life episodes, or just on everything has to be funny, or everything just has to be action-packed, because we have our slice-of-life comedy episodes, and we have really sad, heart-wrenching episodes, and we have mystery and action, exciting people are getting murdered episodes. And we also have shows which are just variety thrown together bits of comedy and storytelling, and we have historical dramas and stuff set in the past, and we have lessons about the Bible and all sorts of different things. It's not just that it's the same characters going through different things, but with other formats like kids radio and BTV, you can really do just about anything on Odyssey and still tie it into the canon. It actually makes it really difficult if someone's never listened to Odyssey before you get them to listen to a kids radio station. You try and explain, no, that's not Odyssey. This is a radio show within the radio show.
The way I
or
explain
BTV,
it is,
and then you're like, it's a TV show within the radio show, and then they're like,
what I say is it's a radio show, and in it, the characters, they have their own radio show. And then my friends just give me a really stupid look, and they're like, why do you listen to a kid's show? And I'm just like, why don't you? And then I walk away.
Yeah. I'm so meta, even this metaphor. Alright, our next point, which we would like to discuss to your ears, is good storytelling and good lessons. And both of these things concurrently, which is the important point. And good storytelling by itself isn't going to have any effect on society. It's going to get listeners, but, that's great. Good storytelling. I'm going to tweet about it. I really like this. Draw some fan art and write some fan fiction. And that's the end of that. And good lessons without a good story is just going to sound really preachy, and no one's going to listen to it. And those who do, it's not really going to imprint themselves on you. If you want to attract people and get them to listen to it and get it to stick and actually have a positive impact, you need to have both at the same time. Have good storytelling that will actually tie in a good solid lesson simultaneously. It is very hard and very rare to find these two things together, but it's something that AIO does wonderfully. And it doesn't do that all the time. There are plenty of episodes that don't do storytelling all that well, and there's plenty of episodes where the lesson is pretty weak. But there are also a lot of episodes that do the two together and do them really well, and man, is it good.
Life expectancy.
Jeff Lewis.
Jeff Lewis!
All right. Next point, Victoria?
Okay. It is something that is fun for all ages. And no, that point isn't going to be as corny as it sounds, as I made it sound. As some of you might know, me and Devin started listening to Odyssey at a very young age. Right after we did, our dad looked at us strangely, and our mom looked at him strangely, and they both said to each other, "It's only a phase. It will just last about a year."
I remember
Well, they were wrong.
I remember telling my dad, like, at this rate of, like, only asking for albums as the only thing I'm asking for birthday and Christmas, at this rate, I'll have them all by the time I'm in grade 11. And my dad's like, you're not still going to be listening to Odyssey by the time you're in grade 11. I was like, you just wait and see. And here I am. Yesterday, I finished my first semester of second year of university, and here we are recording our Adventures in Odyssey podcast. So, ha, 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 ha. I've already pointed out that, recalled that story to him before, and he's like, yeah, you were right, and I was wrong. A very begrudging tone.
And then you asked
But it really
him to
is,
repeat it.
it really is a point, and I mean, you look at the age distribution of the Odyssean fandom, whether it be on forums or on the Facebook page or something like that, and there's a lot of old fans. It's not just like, there's people who are nostalgic, or you get some people who are the creepy people who like kids shows when they're old, because apparently that's a weird thing or something. But it's a lot of people. More often than not, I see, rather than kids trying to get their parents into the show, it's parents who are trying to get their kids into the show because the parents are obsessed with it, and they're trying to get their kids to listen to the show because they love it so much. Oh, of course. Odyssey writes episodes for the entire age spectrum, and there are certainly some episodes which are just focused on younger ages, cough cough fairy tale-vision, as well as the video series, and some are focused on older people, things usually that are dealing with war, more mature topics, and you can go to our Is Odyssey a Kids show to look at episodes which are focused on older things, or Pamela Has a Problem, or other abortion-focused episodes, or things like that. And there are episodes which are focused on both. There was that interview with some of the writers talking about how one of the first rules when they wrote the show was you never talk down to kids. You make kids feel like they're intelligent because they can understand a lot more than you give them credit for. Also make sure that you're putting in references and jokes and stuff that the adults are going to get. Just that, there's 10% of the humor in the episode that only 10% of your audience is going to get, which really comes out in episodes like Hidden in My Heart, where you get all those little references to Rescue 911 and Lassie and Star Trek. And going back and listening to Star Trek now is hilarious. Like all the William Shatner jokes they make and stuff like that about his acting is all this. And the staleness of the story structure.
It's so funny, like, because we've been listening to Odyssey for years and years and years, and then sometime you learn something, and then you're like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that about this series, or I didn't know that about this TV show. And then you continue listening to Odyssey, and then all of a sudden an episode comes up, and you're like, oh my gosh. And then if it happens to me, I usually run downstairs. I'm like, Devin, it's this, and it made me laugh so hard because it's just like all these things.
You finally get the joke.
And I'm like, I finally get it. It's so funny.
Even the vocabulary is so often there's so much directed upwards. I mean, most of Eugene's vocabulary really isn't all that complex compared to what most people kind of stereotype it as. But for example, in English Lit only a couple weeks ago, I finally learned what the word didactic meant, which is Dream Katrina asks to Eugene in solitary refinement, are you always so didactic? And I'd never bothered to look up the word, and now, in second year university, I finally found out what it meant.
What does it mean for our audience?
It means that you are in a authoritative teaching role, and it can either mean you're trying to teach things in kind of a condescending way to someone, or it could mean you're teaching with an ulterior moral motive in a brainwashing kind of way.
Well, for a word that's supposed to be mean condescending, it's really hard to understand what it means. I think they kind of failed on creating that word, but...
All right. Another topic, and one that I really love about Odyssey, and of course to call back our first discussion episode again, because that's really what this is about, Adventures in Odyssey does not shy away from big issues in the least, and I'm not going to go tons into this one because, like I said, our first discussion episode was already about that. So if you want to hear more on that topic, go watch episode 4, I think it was. Yes, it was 4. Is AIO a kid's show? But most shows which are ostensibly for children aren't going to delve into topics like the merits of the Vietnam War, which we'll be talking about next week, abortion, evolution and creationism, biological terrorism, murder, Gnosticism, spiritual idolatry, racism and slavery, etc. People are not terribly interested in hearing the same basic lessons about the Ten Commandments over and over and over. Teaching someone that you don't lie to your parents when you're making a kid show, you can only do that for so long before everything gets repetitive. And by so long, I mean like once. So you need to make things interesting. You need to make them relevant by taking in current issues and addressing them, and that can be seen lots of times. Talking about Gnosticism and basing our faith on what the Word says and not what current archaeology says is what is focused on in The Search for Wit, and that was made because that was the time when the Dead Sea Scrolls were coming out. Or was that the Jesus Cloth? Either way, one of those two. That's when it was happening. And that's the reason why it was made. Phil Lawler has even said that early on in the show they almost made an episode dealing with gay and lesbian studies and that subject, but it never ended up getting produced, which is probably a good thing, not only because it would polarize a lot of people, but making it that early on in the show, as they were going to do, it would probably be a lot better to make it nowadays than back then for all sorts of different political and show writing reasons. I'm not going to get into that. But like I was saying, if you want to keep your audience interested, you need to address topics that are relevant and they're complex and they're interesting and they're not condescending, but they actually engage you and make you feel like you're learning something and learning something important, something you can talk to your friends about, something that is going to make you think on it, and that's something that Odyssey does very, very well. Victoria?
I don't really know if I have anything to say for this. Whenever I was little, I think that I was always very impressed with how, like, even when I was really little starting off with the show, I was always impressed with how deep Odyssey could get with its storylines. Because when you're little, the only thing you usually watch is like Treehouse and stuff like that. So
Which doesn't quite have the same level of intellectual merit as
yeah,
Adventures in
it
Odyssey,
wasn't like
I'm sorry to say.
I got lessons about why people did and shouldn't do things in wars from big comfy couch. If I did, my goodness, that show would be pulled off the air very fast. Fortunately, Odyssey doesn't have to deal with that kind of thing because it is so diverse in its way of storytelling and showing kids things and teaching lessons. It is just amazing.
Do you want to bring up the next point?
Odyssey is a very educational show. It's actually really funny to think about it because I have learned so many things from Odyssey that I have been able to bring up not only at church. Apparently, I didn't know this, but apparently everyone say they learn a lot from me at church because I can always bring up these points from different Bible stories. But I have actually brought up things I've learned from Odyssey at school. For example, we were learning, I think in grade 9 in social studies, either grade 8 or 9, we were learning about like the time of the Romans and Caesars and stuff. And so then my teacher asked us to name a Caesar, and her first thought was like, oh, I bet the first one's gonna be like Caesar Augustus or Julius Caesar or something. And I stick up my hand, I'm like, Nero, Nero. And then she's just like, okay, I didn't think you'd know who Nero was. And I'm like, no, I know who Nero is. And so then And
Or
then
Claudius the Cruel,
a couple minutes
or
later in
Emperor
the class,
Constantine.
she's just like, okay, and then because of this, they had to start rebuilding things because there was a huge fire. I'm like, people accuse Nero of doing it. She's like, yes, Victoria, I know you know who Nero is. and yeah, so yeah.
Fiddling while Rome burned. That's where that expression comes from. Yes, and as lots of people know, in our jazz band at school, the jazz band used to be a club, and then a couple years ago it became an actual class that we got credits for, and so we needed to extend the time that we were there in the evening each week, and we also needed to start doing some sort of theory stuff, and so we started learning about jazz history, and that was right around the time, or it was, I guess, just after the time, when album 51 came out, which of course ended with the amazing season finale of the Jubilee Singers, parts 1, 2, and 3, episodes 664 through 666. And because that's about the history of jazz and the origin of Negro spiritual music in the Western society and the way they view music, I burned the episodes onto a disc and lent it to my band teacher, and she was enamored with the episodes, and we actually listened to some of it in class, like at school, in public secular school. We were sitting, I mean, it was jazz band, so we were all kind of sitting on a couch all piled on top of each other, but still the same idea. Sitting there, listening to the episode, and not just to the music stuff, but actually listening to characters talk to each other about submitting to God's will and how he truly does help out his people, and actually talking about these kinds of things. And we were listening to this in school. Like, that's really cool, because that is the kind of door that gets opened by the education that Odyssey provides. And there's plenty of other things, the amount of things I've learned. That's where I learned how to drive, of course.
From
because,
us.
Drive a standard, so away from us.
Away
Where do we
from
turn the
us.
key? Yeah. So, learned that from there. Lots of other things, like when I was in grade 12 biology, my teacher was like, what are the two main types of plants? And I was like, monocotyledonous and dicotyledonous, thinking back to BTV behind the scenes, and he was like, yes. And I was like, yeah! Odyssey teaches stuff, and you remember it, and then you know everything. There's a t-shirt you can get. It says, like, everything I know I learned from the street, and it has, like, picture of Sesame Street, and that's like me exactly, but with Odyssey. But, the saying doesn't work quite the same, because it's like, I learned it from the street.
Gangsta Nagisa.
Gangsta with Oscar and Elmo.
That would be controversial.
Gangster
anyway.
Yeah, so Odyssey is educational on so many different fronts. There's the biblical front and all that history, there's other historical episodes, and then there's just general things throughout all the episodes, just dropped in all over the place, where you learn tons and tons of stuff. And a show which is educational and makes education fun and interesting is not only going to hook kids and teach them things, but it's also going to give parents more incentive to get the kids to listen to it. So, it's a double good thing, win-win situation. Another point about this show is it leaves a lot to the imagination. And now this intrinsically goes along with the fact that Odyssey is a radio show, and so inherently it's going to leave a lot more to the imagination than a TV show, because in a TV show you're going to see a lot of stuff in the background, and it's going to set a lot of boundaries on you just by the way the sets are set and the people that you see walking around and things like that. The plus with a radio show is in terms of town geography, or people who've been around all this time or haven't been around, or things like that. You're not limited in that same way, because in a radio show you really don't know what's going on for the most part a lot of the time, and so it leaves a lot of room to go back and retcon things into something beautiful. And for example, Doctor Who spoilers for the next 60 seconds, cover your ears. When there's ambiguity about something, that gives you the chance to go back in later and flourish it and turn it into something incredible. Most of the time with TV shows, things are there's too much information to do that. But where you have a big bunch of obscurity, for example, in Doctor Who,
Gave
we
the
have a bunch
Doctor
of obscurity
spoilers.
between the 8th Doctor and the 9th Doctor, that allowed Moffat to go in. There are still spoilers, I have to hurry before 60 seconds are over. Allowed Moffat to go and insert another entire regeneration in there. Just like that, because there's that ambiguity. And with Odyssey, you don't even need that kind of special case of ambiguity. There's ambiguity everywhere because you're only hearing things and not seeing it, and that gives you room all over the place to insert lots of stuff back, which for some people it's like there's not enough detail and stuff and you can do anything, but it really leaves so much stuff open
Another
to
huge
do so
thing
much
that
great
leaves
stuff.
tons to the imagination is the stories they
So,
tell. Like, it's always interesting when even the characters' designs, when they release what a new character looks like, because there's all this conversation that goes on between all the fans, and they're always just like, oh, I always imagined them with this color hair. Oh, I didn't think they'd look like that. Oh, I didn't think they'd dress like that. Or, yeah, I think they'd look like that. Like, there was tons and tons of conversation
or, oh, they've
after
regenerated, I
the
guess, in the
hiatus
case of
when all the
Wit.
characters' designs changed. And I remember me and Devin one time we said like, now we're gonna have to change what they look like in our imagination while we listen to the episodes. Yes, you have a shirt on. And another thing that's interesting
Yes.
is another thing we can leave to the imagination, which is a term we've mentioned before, is called headcanon, which is when you have your own personal idea that you came up with of something that you think happened. And one place where we can have a various amount of headcanons is in lots of the main cast's past. Like, I have this one theory that the reason Jay is mean to Barrett is because Barrett did something to him in his childhood. Devin one time, he said he probably like accidentally spilled Jay's juice box or something when they were 6, so that's why Jay doesn't like Barrett. Like, it's something you can, yeah. It was a while ago.
I said
It's
that?
something you can totally
I don't remember
imagine,
saying that.
especially with like Connie and Eugene, because we know some of their backstory, but we don't know enough that we can be like, oh, they can't have this story in. Like in Champ of the Camp, you find out that Connie and Eugene, spoilers, cover your ears, they actually knew each other without knowing each other, in a way. And they did not
When they
know
were,
that they
like,
had
very young.
actually met over a radio until they were way older. In album 45.
Way older.
So,
Yes. So, adding to that, another beauty of the audio format and the ambiguity therein is the fact that you can replace characters with another voice actor, and the actor only needs to be able to sound the same, not necessarily look the
they
same.
can do
And
it with
obviously,
Doctor
that's not
Who.
something you can do with TV. Occasionally, they do it with TV anyways. And we see that with characters like Batman and James Bond, where you just replace them with someone, even though they don't necessarily look exactly the same or sound exactly the same. It's just close enough, and we try and find the best match we can. With Doctor Who, it's a complete different story because it is actually completely canonized the fact that they're done by someone, but the point is, the person does purposefully look very different and sound different and have a different personality, even though it's the same character. But we don't need to get into all sorts of regeneration hullabaloo. The point is, with radio, you don't need someone to look the same. As long as they can pull off the same voice, then they can replace a previous voice actor if need be. And that's given us something wonderful in that characters don't necessarily have to leave just because the actor has to leave. And of course, we've seen this with Wit, because Wit has had 3 different regenerations on the show. We've had Hal Smith, and then Paul Herlinger, and then Andrei Stoica. And even though the voices changed slightly, it's been mostly the same, and the fact that they look nothing like each other doesn't matter, because it's a radio show. Same thing with Katrina. She used to be Pamela Hayden, and now she's Audrey Wazalewski. And there is a slight difference in the voice, but most people don't notice it unless they're told, which is mostly because there was such a large time gap between the two Katrinas. And there's tons of other characters who have been played by multiple voice actors, and a lot of the time,
That's why we
you don't really
notice
notice unless
things.
you're freakishly obsessive like we are. And that's the beauty of things. Whereas if you were seeing them on screen and you suddenly switched from Paul Herlinger to Andrei Stoika, you would be really confused about who
Is
this
that
young guy is who's
Jerry
running
come
Wits
back
End.
from
Like,
the
is he a new
dead?
employee or something? It would be very confusing.
I think that's about
Anything
it.
to
If you
comment
want to hear more about
there?
how you listening to the show enables you to use your imagination, just listen to some episodes like the Imagination Station, the part 1, when Wit's talking about why he first created the machine.
And finally,
Okay,
Victoria,
this one is my special point.
would you like to bring up
I
our
enjoyed
final
coming up
point?
with it. The villains in this show are amazing. They are so amazing. They are extremely different from each other. Well, yeah, most of them. Like,
Most of
Blackguard
them.
is amazing. Richard, is he more of an anti-hero? I don't know. He made it onto the top villains list. He made it onto the bonus villains thing,
Sometimes
so I'm just going to
it's
call
a
him a villain in
development.
this part. Philip Glossman, Bennett Charles, and the
Bennett
guy whose
Charles,
name I always forget.
Dalton Kern.
Yes. And if you look
Mr.
at their
Grote.
characters, they are so extremely different. Even we are going to count the Whisperer in this. So you take Richard Maxwell and you take the Whisperer as an example. Even though they both have things that they are very skilled at, mainly technology, they still have very different things they're trying to do. Like, Richard's main goal was, I don't want to get into trouble. I want to do what Blackguard wants me to do so I don't get found by the police. So I'm going to do all these bad things. And then the Whisperer, his main goal
Save
was,
my own
I
hide.
want to get applesauce. I want to get revenge on Jason. And I don't care what I do to achieve that. And they also have, some of them you kind of find out a little bit more, like some things about their past, and some you don't. Yeah.
Blackguard and Dalton
And
are
even then,
the
there's
biggest ones
millions of
in
things
that
that we don't
category.
know about them. Like, I think we know more about Blackguard, or like more about Dalton than Blackguard, maybe. Yeah.
I don't know. It's pretty close, actually.
Blackguard's my favorite.
Certainly, Blackguard is more popular with fans than Dalton, though. The point is, Blackguard established a really interesting psychological profile in conjunction with his backstory about why he was doing what he did, and the fact that he had, eventually, by Darkness Before Dawn, that he had an identical twin brother who was also living in Odyssey made things really interesting. And with Dalton Kern, things got very interesting in terms of looking at, like, getting into the mind of the villain, because he had this relationship with Everett that blurred the line between good and evil. And, we can't just be, he's a bad guy, we have to stop him. And, that's something that lots of kids shows do a lot. They put down these really harsh, strict lines between good and evil, when in reality, when you're talking about villains and good guys, things in real life are so much more blurry than that. Not to say that there isn't, absolute good and absolute evil. I mean, the Bible defines, there is good and there is bad, but people have a very blurry spectrum in terms of their actions and the motivations for their actions, and Dalton's relationship with Everett made things really interesting, especially for Leonard, and looking at, is he really evil? Am I doing the right thing in splitting them apart, when even though they shouldn't be together, should they be together? Because he really does genuinely care for Everett, even if he kidnapped him
If you
under the
think
insane
about it, I'm
delusion that
kind
he
of
should have been his
surprised
son instead of
that
Leonard's.
he didn't want, like, I was kind of always disappointed with that episode, the fact that he never really had any conversation with Eugene at all. No, like,
You were disappointed
yes,
with the
but
top
let me explain
floor?
why. He,
The top
like,
floor.
showed more. You would think that since he always thought that Wilma should have been with him, he would have shown more interest in both of the sons. Maybe it was the fact that he thought Eugene was dead, but then he finds out that Eugene is actually alive. So you would think that maybe he would want to somehow do something with Eugene. I'm not saying that he would want to adopt him. Of course, Eugene is way too old for that or anything. Yeah, but you would think he would still at least have some dialogue with him in the episode.
Being 27 years old at the time. It would have been interesting, yes. Although, I don't know. I think the problem is in the way that he perceived Eugene as a person. The way that he learned of Eugene's existence and stuff in Odyssey was as Leonard's son, not Thelma's son. And that probably had a huge amount to do with the way he perceived it, because I think, psychologically speaking, Dalton Kern was not entirely right in the way that he was thinking. Like, he wasn't like, this is Leonard's son and I've kidnapped him. Like,
Which
he
is kind of
actually
creepy.
really thought that Everett was rightfully his child. And so it is very creepy. But it's like Leonard said, Dalton was not completely mentally stable. He kept them both prisoned in a labor camp in Africa for 20 years. So when Eugene in his mind was perceived as Leonard's son and not Thelma's son, he didn't think of him as like, oh, this child is mine. He said, this child is Leonard's. I need to destroy him. I have to destroy Leonard
still kind
because
of wish he
Thelma
had
is
some
mine.
dialogue with Eugene, though. But anyway.
Yeah.
Not really. It's mostly like, hey, give me your father so I can tie him up and stick him in the back of my limo while I flee the country. And that's pretty much all that happened. Yeah, I mean, he interacts like more with Katrina in the episode than he does with Eugene.
Hi. Thank you.
Even though Eugene has like a way bigger part in the episode.
To just be...
Anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, so I do believe that is everything that we have up for discussion today, unless you have any more points to add, Victoria.
I can't think of anything.
Alright, then I think that concludes everything for now. So, yes, as we've seen, be it resolved that you've presented many reasons for why the show has lasted as long as it has, for 26 years and 9 days to this point. We haven't really gone back to the thesis statement as such throughout the entire thing, but I think the idea stands. We explain why the show is good. Some of the points are why it's good, and it's good, which means lots of listeners, which means it will go on for a long time, and some of them are why has the show actually been able to last for so long, such as what is it about the storytelling, like not only focusing on one character or a small set of characters and letting them have more than one arc and letting their character be more complex than that. Those are the types of things that allow the show to actually continue with more and more episodes. So those two factors together are why the show is so popular and has lasted for so long up to this time. It will hopefully last on for another so long, and we'll see, by this time next year, Odyssey is going to be over 750 episodes. That's over 3/4 of the way to 1,000 episodes. When you think about the fact that Doctor Who has been out for 50 years and Odyssey 26, and we're really not all that far behind Doctor Who in numbers of episodes. And Doctor Who has 799 episodes, we have 738. That's not all that big of a difference considering the show is twice as old as Odyssey. So, yeah, it's a long time, a lot of episodes, and still going strong. So, hopefully we've given you some food for thought as to why exactly that is. If you have any more ideas, you know, you can always leave them down in the comments. Shoot us a message on Facebook or Twitter, or blah, 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 whatever you want. I don't know. There's plenty of ways to contact us. You could email us. That stuff is all down in the description.
More thing. Another reason the show's lasted so long is because it has an amazing cast and crew and writers and editors. That is a huge part of it. I remember...
That is a very huge part, and thank you so much to all of the amazing cast and crew
we love you guys.
who have made it last for so long, and thank you to God. Thank you to God for keeping it going through all the trials and tribulations.
One really funny thing to think about is, sorry, Sean, I'm going to use you as an example, is that Devin got his roommate, Sean, to listen to some Odyssey, and the first episode...
The Mysterious Stranger, to be specific. In case you've forgotten, we mentioned it when we were doing Top 10 Reasons What is a Time Lord.
So, one really funny thing that Devin told me that Sean said was when he heard some noises like the doors opening at Wit's End and some other things, he actually turned around because he thought someone was in the room with him. Like someone walked in and they were behind him or something like that. And he kept on turning around and be like, so realistic. Why does it sound like it's really there?
Yeah, people always expect it to be like an audiobook, and that's the thing. There's a big difference between an audiobook and a radio drama.
One is better than the other.
Yes. So, I think that we've just about concluded our argument for now. So, next week on the Oddcast, next week, I say tongue-in-cheek, we are going to be reviewing 2 episodes. Of course, season 57 is over now, and so there will not be new episodes, but because next week, and by I mean next week, I mean like a month ago, which is when that next week would have been from when this episode should have been recorded, is the week of Remembrance Day, or just about there, or Veterans Day, which is I think what you guys call it in the States. And
you crazy Americans.
Yeah. The trade-off is because we're going to be doing Thanksgiving stuff on your Thanksgiving in America. When I say you, I mean Americans, because I imagine most of the people listening are Americans. Not all of them, though, of course. Because we're doing Thanksgiving stuff for your Thanksgiving, we are going to be doing stuff for our Remembrance Day, because Remembrance Day is about as important to us up here as Thanksgiving is down there, and Veterans Day about as important to you guys as Thanksgiving is up here-ish. That's the general sense I get.
So it kind of levels out.
It's a very important holiday, extremely important, much more so than Thanksgiving in Canada. And so we're going to be looking at The Price of Freedom and The War Hero next week, reviewing them, talking about certain various sundry things. So please tune in for then. Until then, thank you for joining us on our side of the YouTube. I'm Devin Francis.
And I'm the one who always wears the red hat.
And you've been watching The Adventures in Odyssey
The Adventures
Oddcast.
in Odyssey Oddcast. Do we get that
There
time?
was, I don't know. It didn't sound right on my side, but who knows with the lag once we put it together in iMovie. I guess we'll see. Bye, everyone.
Anyway, bye, guys.